Have you ever played a game and you just couldn't stop worrying about what was going to happen? Have you ever felt like your thoughts were racing out of control, or that your hands and legs wouldn't stop shaking before or during the game? If so, then you've likely dealt with sports performance anxiety, one of the most common mental blocks that athletes deal with. Hey there, I'm Eli Straw, mental performance coach and the founder of SuccessStartsWithin.com. As a mental performance coach, I work a lot with athletes who deal with anxiety before a game and then also during a game. And to be honest with you, sometimes it's even felt during practice. And so what I want to do in this 4-part series is go into detail about what sports performance anxiety is, how it holds you back and hurts your game, an in-the-moment strategy that you can use to reduce anxiety, and then also a long-term approach to managing and overcoming your performance anxiety. So in this video, we're going to talk about what is performance anxiety. Now, performance anxiety involves extreme worries about what may or may not happen within your sport. Typically, sports performance anxiety is going to be focused on what you don't want to have happen, so making mistakes. And this is why the fear of failure and performance anxiety are going to go hand in hand. Because when you grow anxious, you are worried about making a mistake or not playing well. This happens because of what you think will result from making a mistake or having a poor performance, such as your stats dropping, or maybe you get yelled at by your coach. The more anxious you become, the more you are going to worry about what's going to happen in the future, and then this is going to be followed by fear. You will likely grow afraid of making the mistake, and that's going to cause you to play timidly. When you experience sports performance anxiety, you are likely going to be able to recognize it by the way that you feel. And these are going to be the main symptoms of sports performance anxiety, which include rapid heartbeat, dry mouth, trembling hands and maybe some trembling knees, a shaky voice if you're talking, sweating, maybe some dizziness, blurred vision. You might feel a little lightheaded. You might even feel a little bit of coldness, maybe in your extremities, like some numb fingers or some numb feet. While the physical symptoms are what you're going to notice most, what's actually the main challenge is your thoughts. Your thoughts are the driving force behind you feeling anxious. Now, when you are an athlete with anxiety, for the most part, you know what it feels like to be anxious. However, it may be difficult to separate this anxiety from feelings of nervousness. And nerves, though they're still going to be felt and you're still going to have that churning feeling in your stomach and maybe a rapid heartbeat, nerves can actually be helpful. Sometimes they can provide you with increased focus and then also increased motivation. But anxiety, on the other hand, is going to do nothing but hold you back. So before we talk a little bit more about the cause of anxiety, I want to go over some of the main characteristics of anxiety in sports. So days leading up to the game, you may experience a lot of worries, and this is going to grow worse the closer you get to game time. As you play, your body can feel like it is out of control, and your mind may seem like it even blacks out. The majority of your focus is on what may or may not happen, and you worry about making mistakes more than you think about wanting to succeed. You experience physical symptoms, so like the ones I mentioned earlier, such as shaky hands and legs and maybe some dizziness. After a game, you overanalyze your game and you worry about what others were thinking of you and what others are thinking of you about the way that you played. And then during practices, you may also get anxious about how you're going to perform and worry about making mistakes and how that's going to impact your playing time or what your teammates think of you. It may be difficult for you to get into the flow of the game because of the thoughts and the worries that you're having. You are hyper-focused on mistakes during games. During games, you also feel like you are the one holding yourself back, which we're going to talk more about in the next video. It can feel like you are performing with your foot on the brake. Then you also might dread going into practices or games because you know how intense these feelings of anxiety are. Now, these are some of the main characteristics of sports performance anxiety. Do any of them sound like something you've been experiencing lately? Let me know in the comments below. Now, to better understand sports performance anxiety, it can help to break it down into 3 different factors. We have cognition, the autonomic arousal, and then also the behavioral response. The first element of sports performance anxiety is cognition, and this is going to involve your thoughts. What's really frustrating is that these are typically subconscious thoughts that you may not even recognize or realize that you're having in the moment, but they are there. Cognition is going to be your mental reaction to the situation. So when we're discussing it in relation to your sports, this is going to include the mental reaction you have to the game, or maybe seeing your opponent, or to a mistake that you just made. If you have anxiety before a game, then it's the thoughts that you have about the game in general that are going to be leading to you feeling anxious. However, you may also have more specific anxiety or situational specific anxiety in which case the cognition is going to be centered around a specific situation in the game. An example of this might be you only get anxious when you are shooting free throws, or you only get anxious when it is game point. Autonomic arousal is going to be the second element of performance anxiety, and this is your body's reaction, right? So this is going to include all of the physical symptoms that you are experiencing as a result of the cognition. And then these are going to typically be followed by a behavioral response. Now, when we are talking about a behavioral response to performance anxiety in sports, this is going to come in a few different ways. But for the most part, it's going to have to do with avoidance. You are trying to avoid feeling anxious. More specifically, you're trying to avoid the situation you're worried about. And so this is where what we're going to talk about more in the next video comes into play, where you find yourself almost hiding when you're playing it safe and playing it timidly because you don't want to make a mistake. Now, thinking about the 3 factors of performance anxiety that I just went over, what would you guess is the #1 cause of anxiety in the first place? Let me know in the comments below. Well, it all has to do with the first factor, cognition. The main cause of sports performance anxiety is your thinking, specifically thinking too much about the future. And this is known as outcome-oriented thinking. When you go into a game worried about what's going to happen, your mind is focused on the future. Instead of having your attention really centered on what's going on right now in the moment, it has traveled onto what you don't want to have happen in the future. Now, I was working with a basketball player who was dealing with a lot of sports performance anxiety. His was caused by thoughts that he had before going into the game about not wanting to embarrass himself. Another example is from a softball player who focused on not wanting to get out every time she went up to the plate. She worried about getting benched and what her coach was going to think of her if she got out again and if she couldn't get a hit. Both of these examples really highlight the main cause of sports performance anxiety, worrying too much about the future. The more you think about what you don't want to have happen, the more anxious you're going to become. Instead, what you want to work on is bringing your attention more into the present moment. So go ahead and click right here to watch video number 2 in this series on overcoming sports performance anxiety, where you're going to learn about how anxiety is holding you back, and then you're going to learn some strategies that you can use to overcome performance anxiety as an athlete.